Good evening, everybody. And I tell you what, it's incredibly anxiety-provoking being here and seeing so many faces. I tend to think of depression as a very serious subject. So one of the things that's mandatory here tonight is that we have some fun. You know, it may be a serious subject, but that doesn't mean that we can't enjoy ourselves and have a bit of a laugh. So I'm hopefully going to achieve that, or that you will help me to achieve that here tonight. What I plan tonight is something that's actually quite simple. I want to just briefly look at some facts and figures about depression. And I'm going to look at the cognitive model of depression. Now, if there's anything that I'm saying that isn't clear, please interrupt, hand up, and I will actually clarify it as much as I possibly can. What I'm going to talk about is the cognitive change methods. So when somebody is referred to me, my interest is, in helping that person to develop a life worth living. And I will use whatever techniques, whatever skills that's at my disposal to help that person to develop a life worth living. And I'm going to talk about some of the change methods that I would use with my clients. I also use behavioural change methods. Now, I always do overkill. I always have more information than we will actually need. So some of the slides, what I'm going to do is gloss over them. Others I will spend more time actually with. So without further ado, I'm going to move on. Seligman in 1975 described depression as the common cold of psychiatry. At any one time, 15 to 20% of adults suffer a moderate level of depression, and 12 to 15% of adults suffer clinical depression. That is a significant amount of depression that's actually out there. And very many people could be depressed and not know they're depressed. They just have a sense that things is not right and put it down to many other things. But for many people, depression is time limited. It can be anything from 6 months to 2 years if left untreated. Now, I have to say personally, I have never come across anybody who spontaneously recovered from depression, but I'd love to meet them to find out the reasons why that actually happened. Unfortunately, relapse is frequent. 50% probability after one episode, and 70 to 80% after 2 to 3 episodes, which is a scary figure. But with, so people that have one episode have a better chance. And unfortunately, and one of the most scariest things, is that among the most severely depressed, 15% of those individuals could go on to kill themselves. And that is a very, very scary figure. It actually affects about 121 million people worldwide. It's one of the reasons why drug companies make an enormous amount of money. It's among the leading cause of disability worldwide, and it generally is diagnosed at primary level. It's generally identified at, in a GP practice. But unfortunately, even though it is so common, it is very, very difficult to get good treatment for depression. And many, many people don't know where to turn to. If they're starting to feel bad, it's very, very hard to get, the best kind of treatment. So the one that's most reliably used at the moment is antidepressant medication. And of course, many people don't want to use antidepressant medications because of the gamut of side effects that many of our clients report, like psychosexual difficulties, weight gain. There are many things that make people reluctant to take medication in the first place. But it is effective for 60 to 80% of those individuals. But unfortunately, fewer than 25% of those affected receive such treatments. And there's a number of barriers, to getting the help that they need, like lack of resources, lack of trained providers, and unfortunately, the social stigma. Now, I personally think that the stigma is reducing from a public point of view, but I don't think it's reducing from a personal point of view. I think the individuals themselves feel as stigmatized as they always did, and I think that's very, very disturbing and distressing. That, while society may have moved on, we ourselves haven't. So, what is it? When we talk about depression, what is our understanding of depression? Well, we see it, I mean, in a way, I feel to some extent that I'm teaching you to suck eggs here, because every one of you could possibly tell me more about depression than I can. But because I'm the one that's standing up here, I get the opportunity to do so. But what you've got is this permanent sense of low mood, this loss of interest in practically everything, no sense of pleasure. You live with this constant feeling of guilt, or this feeling that I'm not good enough, that everybody else is in some way better than me. It interferes with our sleep. I mean, we often hear about, getting about 2 hours sleep, and that you wake up at maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, bright-eyed, but knowing that you haven't had enough sleep. Low energy. Very many people have such unbelievable low energy, but they still have to function. They still have to go to jobs, take care of kids, do many, many things. And unfortunately, because their energy levels are so depleted, you end up then almost, as I would say, burning the reserves. So you live in this constant sense of just dragging your heels. And of course, one of the more difficult ones is the poor concentration. Because your concentration is shot to pieces, it also then has an effect on your memory. It means then that it impacts on every aspect of your life, because you're not going to be functioning as well as you would like in a work situation, which then means that people, make judgments about your skills and abilities. So it's a major, major thing. These problems can become chronic and recurrent and lead to substantial impairments in an individual's ability to take care of his or her everyday responsibilities. And we all know about that. And of course, back to, at its worst, it can lead to suicide, a tragic fatality with the loss of about 850,000 lives every year, a significant number. One of the grandfather of cognitive therapy was a guy called Aaron T. Beck. And he developed this understanding of what he calls the negative cognitive triad. And he would say that individuals who suffer with depression have a negative view of themselves. They see themselves as inadequate and unworthy. They have a negative view of others and the environment. Others are always, and it's this skewed perception that people have, because others are always viewed as more competent. They're also viewed as more judgmental for some reason. They see the world as unfulfilling, punishing, and obstructive. In other words, it's blocking me from getting what I want out of life. And of course, they have a negative view of the future. The future is always seen as very bleak, unfulfilling, empty, and painful. And these kind of thinking processes that we talk about, what we call the negative automatic thoughts, these kind of thoughts have an impact on the because there's some kind of neurochemical change that takes place, in the brain. And all of these, impact on each other, because the more reduced activity that you actually have, it has an increased impact on the neurochemical changes. So all of these feed each other almost like a parasite, and one impacts on the other, and it just keeps going around and around. So these are the kind of things that people, with depression, this kind of negative pattern of thinking, they say things like, I'm useless, I'm inadequate, I'm lazy. And if you notice, it's all about the I'ms. You'd never hear somebody. I always think that people that suffer with depression are the nicest people in the world. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, they're too nice, because they have a view that everybody else is different than I am. I'm bad, useless, worthless, a failure, etc. But as well as that, they selectively pay attention to a lot of negative sort of outcomes. Like they see that nothing is worthwhile. Everything works out badly and no one cares about me. And the problem with that, whenever you have a view like that, invariably it turns out just so. Because if I implicitly believe that nothing is worthwhile, what am I going to do? I'm going to do nothing. So therefore, as a result, nothing is worthwhile. So these particular beliefs that we hold keep people who are depressed stuck in that reality. And of course, this particular belief that it will always be like this, I'll never get better, there's nothing I can do. And those particular beliefs are some of the beliefs that can lead to suicide. Because if I believed that I'm going to have 50 more years of feeling like this, would I want to stay around? So when I'm working with my clients, I talk about, when they're with me, I talk about, in my office I have a door over here. And I talk about that in the room that I'm actually in. Okay, the one thing I know for certain, and we all know for certain, is what's happening in this room. But people with depression have this particular idea that if they were no longer around, in other words, if they were in the room in there, that things would be better, things would be different, that things would be better. So what I ask my clients to do is to tell me what they think is in that room. What do you think is in that room? And they always give me the same answer, well, I was never in that room. But I said, you were never dead either. So how do you know that what's on the other side of that door is better than what we have here? But the one thing we can't do is we can't change what's in that room, but we have a chance of changing what's in this room. So my whole focus is getting people to want to stay in the room that they're in. And hopefully I achieve that. One of the things about depression is that there's some kind of a perceptual shift that takes place at some point in that individual's life. So you're actually primed to only notice the negative in any situation. And as one client said to me, what you're saying to me, I'm pointing out, something that's contrary to what they believe. And they'll say, I hear what you're saying, and it makes intellectual sense to me. But it doesn't feel like that to me. And we know ourselves that we're driven not by facts, but by feelings. So what I try to do again is get them to, at some level, consider the possibility, consider it, that maybe that their perceptions has been skewed in some way by lifetime experiences. So they're primed to screen out information that's incongruent. So anything that would make them question, they will say things like, well, it's all right for you, or it's all right for them, or I hear what you're saying and it makes sense, but that's not what it feels like. What they also do is that they spend a lot of time, making interpretations and inferences. Say, for example, if somebody has lost their job, they will see themselves as a total screw-up. It never crosses their mind, okay, I may have screwed up in one area. I may have screwed up in my job, but it doesn't mean that I've screwed up in every aspect of my life. But they struggle to see it in that way. And what they then go on to do is to exaggerate the implications of that negative experience. So what they will start doing is, it's almost like I refer to it almost like an inverted pyramid. So what you actually have is that you've lost your job. Then all of a sudden it's what everybody's going to think. And even though they have skills and abilities, and maybe they have a really good education and they're, and maybe they're, that they're working in a career that's, they have a better chance of getting a job. But no, they will point out the negatives in every situation. In fact, in my sessions, they will argue with me about why I'm wrong and why they're right, even though they know that holding on to their beliefs is going to keep them stuck in this bad place. So how come people get depressed? Well, Aaron T. Beck developed this particular model, and he would say that we're set up from a very, very young age. That our early lifetime experiences shape us in some particular way. It can be relationships being constantly compared, criticised, being bullied. In fact, they argue that who we are today was formed in the first 5 years of your life. 5 years. I mean, we don't consider whenever we have a child, we don't consider that the things that we do and how we interact with them, that it's shaping the person that's going to be around today. But what they say is that after 5 years, all that actually happens is that it becomes more solid, but that it's formed within the first 5 years of your existence. And what you then develop is like certain fundamental beliefs that you hold, and as Aaron T. Beck calls it, the cognitive triad. Now, say for example, if you were constantly compared to, say for example, a more intellectual sister or brother, what you actually have then is you grow up with this particular belief that I'm not good enough. Now, if you have a belief that I'm not good enough, you'll either do one of two things. You will live your life as if you're not good enough, or you will set about proving that you are good enough. And you get caught up in that sort of conundrum. So, say for example, a lot of entrepreneurs, people who are very successful, may have very, very low self-esteem. So what they're doing the whole time is they're constantly proving their worth and never feel satisfied, because underneath it all is this particular belief that I'm not good enough. Now, others, what they do is they live up to it. You know, everybody thinks I'm not good enough, so there's no point in me trying. So they live as if they're not good enough. Now, for those who, on the surface, were very successful up until they first developed their first depression, and it's usually a critical incident. Something actually happens. Now, I refer to that first part as an emotional aneurysm. We've often heard of a heart aneurysm or a brain aneurysm. Well, I refer to it as an emotional aneurysm, because I implicitly believe that there, for the grace of God, go I. If I don't know how my early lifetime experiences affected me, because we take it for granted. But if the critical incident is in some way matched by our past experience, so in other words, say for example, if I'm constantly compared and I'm led to believe that that I'm not good enough, and all of a sudden I'm in work and somebody else is promoted above me, somebody who maybe equal skills or even for that matter lesser skills, and all of a sudden the aneurysm explodes and it opens up a whole can of worms within us that is very, very difficult then to close. So that activates all of the assumptions and beliefs from our past, and then starts all these symptoms, the negative automatic thoughts, the affect, the behaviour, the motivation, etc., etc., etc. So this is it in basically, the model in a nutshell. So what you have is the event. And the event is this emotional, it's this emotional aneurysm. And it's not the event, and this is what we keep saying, it's not the event in itself that creates the problem. It's how we perceive the event. It's how I see it. So no two people is going to look at that particular event in exactly the same way. So if I'm looking at it in a particular way, it's going to then drive the emotion. The emotion then is going to reinforce how I look at the situation. And all of this is going to affect my behaviour. So in what way does it affect my behaviour? Well, for most people who suffer with depression, they have this very strong urge to go into hiding, because they don't want anybody to see them the way they are. It's almost like they feel this abject shame that there's something, it reveals something about them. They don't see it that we all have the potential given the right set of circumstances. So this here would nearly make you dizzy because it just goes round in circles. One thing feeds another and just keeps it moving. So the cognitive model suggests that people form assumptions or beliefs about themselves, and it's almost like they actually, fit it into their preconceived ideas. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong, because we all have to make sense of our experiences. But for people with depression, for some reason, if there was as the saying goes, if there was a right way and a wrong way to do something, you can bet your bottom dollar that people with depression will pick the wrong way. We don't know the reasons why. It's almost like, that they feel compelled in some ways. It's almost like sometimes it seems like, or it appears as if they're almost being punitive in themselves. It's almost like I have to punish myself because I screwed up, I failed. But the thing is, when these assumptions are activated, it just creates this wellspring of negative automatic thoughts that just keep them stuck in the here and now. So my goal all the time is to try and break into this vicious circle by teaching them, individuals, the ability to question and challenge the thoughts and assumptions. Now that is very, very difficult. If I tried right now to try and convince you that the world was flat, how much success would I have? Not very. You'd come back with all the arguments about, how the world is round. Well, for people with depression, it's a bit like that. They know that the things are the way they are. So they hold on to those particular beliefs, and they really struggle to let them go. So at the core is this core belief, which activates the assumptions, so that the only way that we can actually we can't access our core beliefs. These dysfunctional assumptions, they're the rules in which we live by. Every single one of us in this room has rules. Do we know about them? Do we know what they are? I don't. But I'll tell you when I do know, when somebody breaks one of them, or if I break one of them. But we're always going to know after the fact, not before the fact. So people always talk about these negative automatic thoughts. So what are they? Well, how many of us in this room, pay attention to what we're thinking? I don't. But the thing is, when somebody comes to me, the first thing I'm going to ask them to do is pay attention to what they're thinking. And it's very, very difficult to do because these thoughts are so automatic. But people with depression have a different set of automatic thoughts. These particular automatic thoughts are much more pathological than the ordinary everyday person. These particular automatic thoughts have the ability to read minds. Terrible thing. I often refer to these automatic thoughts as a camera that's up here and it's monitoring everything that's going on around me. And it can tell, it tells me everything that you're thinking. It tells me what you're thinking, and it tells me you think I'm boring. You think I'm stupid. You think I'm dumb. And the thing is, the crazy part of it is, they never question it. They accept it as a truth, which makes it which then brings them further down. So this whole thing about the pathological critic is something that's very, very much part of depression. How many of us have experienced a pathological critic? Hands up. Yeah. Quite a significant number of people. And some of my clients will say to me that the only time it's silent is when I'm asleep. So if it's only silent when I'm asleep, what am I going to do? I want to sleep. Absolutely. And I remember one particular person, I said, well, one of the things that we have to do before we do anything else is that we have to silence the critic. You know the answer I got? Well, if you silence the critic, there's nothing left in my head. My brain will be empty. And they found that process very scary. The idea that if somebody, if you stop the pathological critic, that there'll be nothing left. Needless to say, that isn't the case, because what you leave is the chatterbox. And the chatterbox is the person that organises our day, that keeps us, hopefully, on the straight and narrow. But these automatic thoughts can be so habitual, so much a normal part of our lives that we don't hear them. We don't hear the damage that they are doing. So I will start tackling that very, very early in therapy, because I need to shut it up very, very early on. The dysfunctional assumptions, well, I don't generally, target that early in therapy, because when somebody comes to me, they're usually so caught up in what's going on that they don't want to hear the word, rules for living, what you assume, what you believe. I don't go there, but I will do it whenever they start to make changes in their lives. There's some more of the symptoms of depression. We know all about them, the self-criticism, the hopelessness, and there's a number of different models out there in recent times that has proved very, very effective for depression. And one of them is behavioural activation therapy. But the one that's the most popular one that's coming out is compassion therapy. In other words, and this is anathema to people with depression, to think that somebody might suggest that you develop good feelings about yourself is something that they really struggle with, because surely everybody knows I'm a screw-up. So you're asking me to have good feelings about myself? They would really struggle with that. So when a person is depressed, what kind of process that goes on? Well, one of the things that we know is that people who have depression, very often what they do is that they focus on past events. People with anxiety tends to be future events and what might happen, and they see the future as very threatening. For people with depression, it's always about what I've done or what I failed to do. Thinking is very black and white, right or wrong. They can't see. They don't even think a grey area exists. Again, everything is very overgeneralized. They only ever recall negative memories from the past and find it harder to recall positive ones. And with past clients, I've asked them to bring in photograph albums. And they're always very, very surprised when they do, because they will say that it's funny, I always thought that, my childhood and my earlier formative experiences was really bad. But when I went through the photographs, I realised, okay, there were bad bits, but there were a hell of a lot more good bits than there were bad bits. And they think about the past events in what I call a ruminative way, or what is called a ruminative way. And I tend to refer to that as a dog and a bone. A dog buries a bone. What does he do? He digs it up to see if it's still there, and then he buries it again. And before long, what you've got is a lot of holes in your garden. It's almost like they have to take out this particular thought and look at it as if, by looking at it, that in some way it'll have magically changed the next time that you look at it. But it doesn't. It is like putting acid in a wound. It just eats away any good feeling that you have. And of course, they're much more sensitive to criticism. And they see criticism where it was never intended. They take things personally, whether it was meant this way or not. There's three basic themes in depression. And one of them, and the most important one, is the themes of loss. And Beck distinguishes between actual and perceived loss. So an actual loss is an actual event that actually has happened. And, people will come into me and they say, well, nothing's really significantly happened in my life. But then when you inquire deeper, you find out that it actually is a perceived loss. Like, a lot of women, for example, become depressed when the children leave home because they see that their primary role has now shifted, and they find it really hard to change gears and develop a different life. Loss of purpose, loss of status. Our psychotherapy service is inundated this last while with people with depression, because things have changed so much in Ireland at the moment People are unemployed. They're really struggling. So it impacts on their perception of themselves. And of course, the other two is helplessness and hopelessness. I think these are the two things that I battle with my clients all the time. This helplessness, this particular conviction that they have, that there is absolutely nothing in the world that I can do to bring about a change in how I'm feeling. And I mean, that must be incredibly scary if I believe there is nothing that I can do. And of course, hopelessness. Those two, I think the first one sort of starts it off, the sense of loss. But what keeps it going and maintains it is this idea of the helplessness and the hopelessness. Negative events, you see, in some ways, when these particular negative events, they never see that it's about circumstances. They never see, for example, that they were paid off because the business was going bankrupt. They have this particular perception that it must have been something that I did. And we don't know the reasons why it's always about I. And of course, positive events, well, they'll find a way of taking that away as well. The primary symptoms are often exacerbated by what we call the secondary negative or self-defeating thoughts about the symptoms of depression. People can become very passive. They'll wait. They have this particular belief that's fed by medication, really, that all I have to do is sit here and wait, and one of these days I'm going to feel different. I'm going to feel better. And of course that doesn't happen, because the first step in the road to recovery is to get off your rear end. Get out there and do something. But people say to me, yeah, but I don't feel like doing it. I'll wait until I feel like doing it, and then I'll do it. And I'm saying, well, that's never going to happen. You have to, I use the analogy with my clients that it's a bit like bad weather. You have to generate a wind to shift the cloud that hangs over the land. The more wind that you generate, the better weather you actually have. So it's about getting off your butt end and going out there and doing something, and as I say to people, if you're waiting for yourself to enjoy it, forget it. The first step is the sense of satisfaction and achievement that you get from actually doing it. People get very worried about their memory and concentration because they start worrying about, am I going crazy? Am I going to end up am I going to end up developing Alzheimer's because my memory is so bad? And of course, because of the medication and because of the depression, you lose interest in anything sexual. And of course, then that leads to major problems, in a marriage or in a relationship. So this is the sort of the vicious circle that people get caught up in. You've got a depressed mood, which leads to negative cognitive biases. And as you can see, there's all these particular loops that a person can actually get caught up in. I can't point them out to you, but you can actually see you've got depressed mood that leads to the negative cognitions, which brings you back to reduced activity, which leads to a more negative view of self, which lowers the mood. Another one is depressed mood, negative cognitions, reduced activity, loss of pleasure in activities, back to depressed mood. So you get caught up in this particular vicious circle, and that's just another one. Okay, so say, for example, somebody presents to me with depression. What I try to do is, the average number of sessions is anything between 12 to 18. But in our service, we tend to get the more, what I would, for want of a better word, the more chronic problem. It's more fixed. And it can take anything up to a year for a person to start noticing any kind of significant improvement, in their lives. All I'm just talking about here is just the basic structure. What you've got is the assessment. You identify the problems and targets. One of the things that is really, really important is unless the person develops a goal, in other words, that they're very clear about what they want out of therapy, then they're not going to get anywhere. So I constantly keep bringing them back to, you need to keep your eye on the ball here. This is what you want to achieve. This is what you want for your life. Now, is this going to help you to achieve this, or is this going to bring you somewhere else? And it's all the time keeping people focused, because the one thing that they don't have in their life is focus. I will always start by working on what they're doing, because when people present, their depression is usually so significant that they can barely think beyond the moment. But one of the things that they can do is that they can actually take some kind of action. And I will tell clients, when the ones that say that I just can't get out of the bed, I'll say fall out of it. Or they'll say to me, I can't get out of the bed, so you peed it. You peed in the bed. No, I didn't. Oh, so you are able to get out of the bed, it's just that you got back into it. And what I'll say is to get out of the house in the shortest possible time. Because for a lot of them, it's like a piece of metal that's actually adhered to their back, and underneath the bed is an enormous big magnet. And what happens is they get halfway up, but the pull of the magnet is so strong that and they'll say, I'll get up in a minute. So the hardest part for most people is to just get out of that particular bed. And then the next one is to get out of the bedroom, get out of the kitchen, get out of the house. Once you get them moving, things start to improve after that. And then, of course, we move into looking at their way of thinking. But the first stage is get them active. So these are some of the kinds of the techniques that we would use. And I'm not going to go through them. But the first one, as I said, is activity scheduling, graded tasks, just doing things. There was one particular lady way back many, many years ago. The first task I asked her to do was to wash her kitchen door. That's all. I told her that she wasn't allowed to do anything else other than wash her kitchen door. So why did I tell her to wash the kitchen door? It was definitely dirty, because it hadn't been washed in the longest period of time. But the thing is, every time, we walk in and out of the kitchen possibly 50 times a day, but every time she walked in that kitchen door, she noticed it was clean. And that encouraged her to do a little bit more and a little bit more. But you might say, yeah, but the floor was filthy. Yeah, but the door wasn't. So what you're doing is that you have to get them, in a way. If you give them too much information, if you give them too many tasks, immediately they have that overwhelmed feeling where the exhaustion just hits. And it feels as if your life's blood has just drained down the toilet. So the tasks have to be small and manageable. If it's too much, they'll give up. The automatic thoughts that I'm actually looking for is the ones that tell them there's no point in doing this. It's not going to make any difference. Why bother trying? So one of the things that I will get them to do is just borrow my conviction that it can be different. Borrow it. And slowly but surely, things start to turn around. I will spend a lot of time getting them to change and challenge their thinking. Challenge their beliefs that nothing will make any difference, that there's no point in trying. And I'll use whatever kinds of tools that I can to make that happen. The identifying rules for living and modifying the rules, that's so far down the road that I'm not even going to talk about it tonight. And of course, what we actually have is these additional methods. We're not going to talk about that. Now, problem solving is something that's very, very important, because individuals with depressions lose the ability to work through their problems. It's almost like they're like rabbits caught in car lights. They're just not able to work it out. So we would spend a lot of time just trying to solve their problems that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So what are the three broad aims? Well, the only thing I care about, is providing relief from the symptoms. I'll do whatever it actually takes. I had one particular client running up and down stairs. That's all he had to do, run up and down stairs. Because, again, it gets the heart moving, it gets them into a different mind state to feel as if they're actually doing something. He said, well, anybody can run up and down the stairs. Yeah, but you're not. So let's try it. Let's see what difference it makes. Let's experiment. You do it and come back and tell me, did it make no difference or some difference? If it made some difference, let's build on it. If it made no difference, then let's change it. The second is to identify the problems. There's a lot of, because a person has been depressed for a long period of time, you'll usually find that they have been avoiding doing a lot of things like paying bills, cleaning the house, meeting the family. There's a lot of conflict because people are pissed off because they're not doing the things that they're supposed to be doing. So what you work on is, again, problem solving, getting them back into the land of the living. And of course, what I want to do is stop them getting depressed again. That's as simple. And if I achieve those three aims, then I feel as if I've done something, that I've given this person a life worth living. I will use any method that I can. Educating them to think differently is very, very important. I'll give them handouts, but it has to be brief. If it's too much information, it ain't going to work. Because again, immediately because of the depression, they can get overwhelmed very, very easily. I'll use diary sheets. Now, one of the other things that I do as well is that I audio tape a lot of my sessions. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And the reasons why I audio tape the sessions is because if my sessions would generally be a 50-minute session, they might, if I'm lucky, remember 5 minutes. So when I audio tape the session, they actually can listen to it in between sessions, and MP3 players are brilliant for that, and they can listen to them wherever they actually are. Diary sheets I will use if the person is further down the road, but I won't start there, because hand them a sheet of paper and all their early lifetime experiences of being in school or whatever comes roaring to the surface, and all it does is creates problems. So I, generally speaking, only use that whenever they're further down the road of recovery. Okay, this is sort of a typical kind of thinking process that many people with depression actually would use. For example, they'd say things like, there's no point in doing anything, I don't have the energy, I'm not in the mood, I'll do it tomorrow. And that leads to self-defeating actions, sticking to bed, avoiding people, and of course then that reinforces the whole kind of thinking process that I'm useless, I'm no good. So all the time, what you're doing is creating, as I say to people, there's two aspects to depression. There's the mood depression, clinical depression, and then there is being depressed. So when we talk about being depressed, what do we mean? Well, in my experience, being depressed is a behaviour. It's an attitude. You can always tell somebody who has a depression, and that is they don't really care about themselves. In some cases, they have just not enough energy to wash themselves. They just have this sort of, what's the point? So from a very early point, one of the things that I'm trying to do is I'll say to them, what I want you to do is that I want you to make an effort. I know it's going to be difficult. And I said, when you're walking down the street, glance at yourself, in the windows. I said, okay, everybody will think you're vain, but so what? At least you're going to get positive feedback from what's looking back at you. But if you're walking down the street looking miserable, then all that it's going to do is reinforce the misery that you feel on the inside. So it's about having a different way of looking at yourself. Okay, these are some of the typical beliefs of people who suffer with depression. I must be loved by everyone. So if one person or if a relationship breaks down, that's enough to, again, this can be the emotional aneurysm that we talked about. Either I'm 100% successful or I'm a total flop. I know somebody who actually got into an absolute tailspin because she got an A in an exam when she anticipated that she'd get an A+. And she went into an absolute tailspin and seen herself as an absolute failure. I was agog. I mean, this person, how many of us in the room here ever got an A+ in an exam? I certainly never did. But the thing is, it's their perception. My value as a person depends on what other people think of me. So if anything happens that challenges that, in other words, if one person falls out with me, enough. I should always be a nice person. Yeah, in what planet? So there's quite a number of different beliefs that people with depression actually have. Okay, we've talked about quite a lot of the different techniques that you could actually use, the different interventions. But all the time, the most important part of it is getting individuals to question the things that they believe. It's about not accepting them at face value. Whatever challenges that you actually use, don't accept them at face value. Keep in mind that your reasoning, the people with depression, their reasoning is biased. It's flawed. But they accept that flaw as a fact and not just an opinion. So what I will spend my time doing is doing everything I can to try and get them to change their perception of their reality and help them to see that it's an opinion and not a fact. Yeah, this is one of the things that the behavioural activation I spoke about. Again, it's about getting people moving. It's getting people doing things in a different way. Again, monitoring moods. Individuals with depression, generally speaking, never notice when their mood is changed. They never notice, it's about degrees. It's about degrees of improvement. They only want the 10 out of the 10. But one of the things that you sometimes have to be satisfied is one step. But they don't want one step. And, one of the things that I have outside my office door is I have a number of steps. And, what I'll ask my clients to do is I'll take them out to the steps and I'll ask them to stand on the ground and reach the 5th step. So, of course, the first thing that they go to do is go in the 2nd step. And I said, no, you can't do that. I asked you to stand on the 5th step. And say, well, I can't do that. That's what you're trying to do. You're putting so much pressure on yourself to achieve more than is humanly possible to achieve. You can do anything once you do it in a progressive step. And it has to be within their particular ability. Again, structured problem solving. And sometimes people need help with that because they can't see the wood for the trees. You need somebody to help them to separate all the problems that are there and look at all of the solutions. But they can't see that. So they feel, so overwhelmed by the experience that they just stop dealing with it. Okay, so what is the recipe for success? Well, slow the pace. Just move at the level the individual is at. I'm constantly checking in. Am I on the right track here? Am I moving too fast? Is there anything more that we can be doing here? What I want people to do is ask questions, not be a passive recipient in anything. Ask questions, and I hopefully will give them time to ask those questions. Because I know their memories, their concentration is so bad, I will keep giving a synopsis of, just brief summaries of, okay, so my understanding is that, you did this and this and this and this happened. Have I got that right? Because I know that their mind at the moment is quite small. And I'm forever giving out handouts. I don't know how many trees that I've burnt down at this stage. And finally, what I'll say here is that it's really, really important. When I'm treating hopelessness and suicidality, it's really, really important that it is seen as a symptom of depression and not a fact. Because they see it as a fact. They see that depression is a state of, that it's a permanent feature. They don't see it that it's treatable, but it is. We have to give people hope. We have to give them a sense that things can change and things will change. It's about helping them to spot and notice the type of thinking that they're practicing. Tell someone, talk. But the thing is, they convince themselves that nobody wants to hear. I'm burdening people. They've had it. They're sick of me. They've heard it all before. I don't care. I don't care. Just say it again. Say it again. Make people listen. And help them to see that suicidal thinking is temporary. It's not a permanent part of their lives. But some people think that it actually is. We want to give people a reason to live. So what we do is we develop some kind of a plan, some kind of a plan that keeps them safe. When you're working with individuals with suicidal thoughts and they're expressing them in the session, what I want to know is, how immediate it is. Because sometimes what people talk about is intrusive thoughts of suicide as opposed to actual plans. We want to know what are the risk factors. And it's a very difficult one. And I find that a lot of people find the subject of suicide very disturbing. They don't even like the word because it distresses people. But if we don't talk about it, if we treat it as almost like leprosy, then it's going to continue. And it is increasing. And we need to find a way of changing that. We need to know what strengths the client has to fight these kind of thoughts and what supports they have. The ones that have a greater risk are those that don't see themselves as having supports in their lives. We want to know, what potential the client has for, modifying these hopeless, self-destructive thoughts. And it's very difficult for them to do that. And we want to know, what kind of positive behaviours this person can actually get involved in that's going to help to, in some way, counter these thoughts. And, of course, how solidly can the client commit and adhere to an anti-suicide plan. Okay. One of the things that's actually there, I put down 3 particular books that I use on a regular basis in therapy. So I'll just leave that up there. And what I'm going to do now is open the floor to questions.